Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Courtroom Insider. I'm Nate Eaton, back in Idaho after an eventful weekend in Arizona. So glad you are with us tonight. We have a fascinating show, two guests who really know crime. They know crime, not because they've committed crime, because they are two of, I would say, the best experts in the country when it comes to blood and forensic evidence. And I'm going to introduce them here in just a minute and you'll hear from them about how what they do has helped solve crimes for decades. They've seen hundreds of dead bodies, and they are part of what's called CrimeCamp, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. It's a fascinating thing that's coming up here, and there's still some spots available if you love true crime and want to go camping. Crime style. This is the camp for you. But first, we got to talk about Lerah Vallow. I went to Arizona over the weekend, and I'm working on an in-depth project that'll you'll be able to tell you about in the coming months. But was able to go to Lerah Vallow's hearing on Friday. We met Friday night for Courtroom Insider and spoke about what happened at the hearing. You may recall she filed some motions there in court. We don't know what they were. They were handwritten. She handed them to the judge. But the judge has officially ordered responses to some of motions she had previously filed. She had filed a motion to order the state of Arizona to produce discovery of extradition. And the judge issued a written argument, or a written ruling, I should say, after Friday's hearing. And this is what he said. The defendant has failed to establish there is any relevance to the requested documents, nor that the disclosure of extradition documents would be reasonably likely to lead to any discoverable information related to the crimes with which the defendant is charged. As the defendant's motion to order Maricopa County Sheriff's Office to produce defendant's records requests essentially every document in the Madison County Sheriff's Office possession and or control related to the defendant, much of the requested documentation would be irrelevant. Administrative documentation. A close read of the request indicates the defendant is concerned the Sheriff's Office may have disclosed confidential communications between the defendant and either her legal team and or confidential communications made during the course of mental or emotional treatment. The motion fails to articulate any basis for this suspicion. The motion is likely overly broad and fails to establish that granting the request would lead to any relevant information. It is further ordered denying the request. So Lerah Vallow's requests, Lerah Vallow Daybell's requests, her motions thus far have been denied. She did hand over those two handwritten motions in the court on Friday. The judge has not ordered a ruling as of now. We will see what he says. We don't know what those motions were, but we'll see. So I would imagine between now and then, Lerah will be gearing up for her trial, which is set to begin March 31st. And the next hearing, I believe, is March 18th, a couple of weeks before that. That'll be the final hearing before the trial. Maybe there'll be one or two more scheduled between now and then. But again, if you didn't join us Friday, I talked about that this trial should be much shorter. It should be go quicker. The jury, I imagine, will be seated within a day, maybe less, maybe a little longer. And we'll see with as far as media coverage. We are hoping that the judge will allow a live stream or at least video footage. We don't foresee that being an issue, but we have some of the other news agencies that we've been working with have been, working on that sort of thing as far as the cameras are concerned. But this was Lerah on Friday. She was happy. She was, joking with her attorneys, chatting with her attorneys. Her mom and sister were there in court. They weren't able to talk to each other. You're not allowed to talk to the defendants who are over the bar, as they say. But they were able to smile at each other, and that's where things stand with Lerah Vallow. As for Chad Daybell, we await further as it slowly works its way through appeals, and he remains incarcerated at the prison in Boise. Now to another big case here in Idaho, the Brian Kohberger case. Of course, this is the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students. He has a hearing next week, and it's a motions hearing, and basically the judge has laid out kind of a timeline for when things need to be submitted in preparation of trial, which will schedule to begin now at the end of August. So the judge has said that the defendant has to disclose all their witnesses, exhibits, and expert opinions by January 9th. So that had to be in last week. Then the state had to disclose its witnesses, exhibits, and opinions by today, the 16th. Then the defendant, again, Kohberger's team, has to disclose any rebuttal discourses to the court and to the state by January 21st. So you got all that. They have to basically let all the sides know and the court know, here's who we're going to call as witnesses potentially, here's our evidence, and if we have any expert opinions who will be taking the stand, here's who they are. All the sides have to have that ready to the court ahead of this hearing, which will be on the 23rd. On the 21st, this just came down, there will be a closed hearing by remote video. That's on the 21st at 10 a.m. For a couple of reasons. One, the defense has a motion to unseal materials related to its request to suppress evidence stemming from the use of IgG DNA. And 2, the second purpose of the hearing will be to consider what portions, if any, should the various motions on the 23rd and 24th be open to the public either live or by video. So it sounds like the judge on this closed hearing on the 21st, they're going to talk about what should be public, what should we broadcast live, open up the courtroom, whatever, on the 23rd and 24th. So will we know if that hearing will be televised? Right now, we don't. If we'll be able to show it to you, we don't. I would imagine there will be some portions that the public will have a right to see. There'll obviously be some portions that will be closed. Like in the Vallow Daybell trials, we did not know who the witnesses were going to be until that day. They didn't release a witness list. And it sounds like they're not going to do that in this particular case. But what they will do is hopefully, let us know what we can show you from those hearings on the 23rd. It looks like Brian Kohberger on the 21st, that closed hearing next week, will appear via video from the Ada County Jail. And he will not be brought over to the courthouse. And it looks like the other attorneys will appear via video too. So that will be an interesting trial. We still have not, the judge still has not ruled on a camera if there's going to be a live stream of that trial. We're hoping for that, and at least so you can watch it from wherever. And I know some of the families of the victims are hoping for that too. So that's the latest on the Brian Kohberger trial. We wait and we see what's going to happen there. Now to tonight's guests. I'm excited for you to hear these interviews. I spoke with them just a few hours ago, and I found out about these 2 ladies when a couple of months ago, my wife and I went on the crime cruise. It's a thing. It's run through CrimeCon, which if you're into true crime, you got to go. It's an amazing experience, and you meet so many interesting people. But they told me that, hey, coming up in March, we're going to be doing a crime camp. And I'm like, what? That sounds creepy, going out in the woods, sleeping in a tent. And they're like, no, it's not like that. It's Unlock the Secrets of the Crime Scene at Crime Camp, a unique blend of discovery, education, and unforgettable experiences. So what it is you unleash your inner investigator at the ultimate hands-on forensic experience. Crime Camp, hosted by CrimeCon and the University of Florida Maples Center for Forensic Medicine, is where you solve with elite experts at this exclusive event, real-world crime solving, they say. It's limited to less than 125 people. You don't sleep in a tent. You're staying at a hotel. But you are going out and you're learning alongside experts. You're learning about bloodstain patterns, casting, tool marks, and impressions. Remember, that was such a big deal in the Daybell cases, the casting and the tool marks and the impressions. There's going to be experts there that participants will learn about what they do. Fingerprints, forensic entomology, shooting reconstruction. It's a full-on camp, like a crime camp, without the tents. And you get to shower every night, and the meals are provided, and the hotel is provided. And you get to learn from some incredible experts like the 2 ladies I'm about to introduce you to tonight. Dr. Lerah Sutton and Dr. Gabriele Suboch. Dr. Sutton is the director of the forensic medicine program at the University of Florida College of Medicine and the assistant director of the Maples Center for Forensic Medicine. She's an award-winning educator teaching both academic and continuing education courses in law enforcement, death investigations, forensic science professionals. She's a medico-legal death investigator and the deputy commander with the Florida Emergency Mortuary Operations Response System. She actively consults for over 100 state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies, medical examiners, and coroner's offices on both active and cold cases relating to human decomposition, clandestine gravesite detection and excavation, and estimation of post-mortem interval. This lady is so smart, and when I was talking with her, I thought so much of the Daybell case and how much the things that were presented during those cases this woman knows, she's experienced. So I want to play that interview for you, and then I'll introduce our second guest, Dr. Gabriele Suboch. But first, my conversation with Dr. Sutton. I just want to thank you for joining me today, Dr. Sutton. Can you give us a little bit of your background as to when you knew you wanted to go into forensic medicine? Is that what you call it, a medicine or practice?
Forensic medicine, yes. So the short answer is essentially, I think I always knew. A lot of my family comes from rural parts of South Georgia, so farming and animals was very commonplace in my life growing up. And unlike a lot of kids who, if you happen to stumble upon something dead when you're out in the woods, being very freaked out, I thought it was really great and interesting. And so very quickly my family realized, okay, this is a child who likes death. We got to steer her one of two ways, either science or serial killing. You see which route I picked, and I've kind of followed that path ever since.
You made the good choice, obviously.
Definitely. Choose to use your powers for good.
So how many dead bodies would you say that you've seen over your career?
Ooh, human or animal?
Let's talk human.
Sure, probably thousands, to be honest. I started my career at a medical examiner's office in Daytona Beach and moved up to the Gainesville area when I started my higher education schooling, and have stayed in the area ever since. And I work not only with our local district medical examiners offices, but I consult for over 100 different agencies nationwide.
Paint the picture for us. If you're a medical examiner, or those are a little bit different than a coroner, obviously, but if you get called out as an ME to a dead body and there's suspicious circumstances, what are the first things you do when you arrive at the scene?
Sure. Well, I myself am not a medical examiner, but I work for and with a lot of them. So my area of specialization is human decomposition and forensic taphonomy.
Okay, so then let me ask you what you would do. I want to hear what you would do rather than like an ME. My apologies.
Sure, no problem. So in general, when I get called out to a scene, ultimately it depends on the kind of scene it is. If it's a decomposition case where they have a decedent, it's pretty straightforward. I always want to start with very thorough documentation of the scene, because understanding the surrounding circumstances is going to be really critical for my interpretation of the scene itself and helping to determine the postmortem interval. So I'm starting with taking notes, doing a lot of photography, documenting temperature, ambient temperature of the surrounding area of the body, if it's indoors, outdoors, if there's a light source, wind exposure, anything that might affect the overall process of decomposition. So that's going to be my primary focus if we initially have a body, and every scene is unique. There are some things you're going to want to do on every scene every time, but the circumstances are going to dictate how I approach it. Am I looking for evidence of trauma? Am I looking for general variables that will contribute to the postmortem interval analysis? So those are actually some of my more straightforward type cases, because you come on scene and you have a body. A lot of what I get called in to do, particularly recently, is helping to find where a body might be. They have suspicion of a body maybe being buried in a certain area, and they call me in to try to help them find it. So that totally changes the game on a scene when I get called out. We don't have a body yet, but we're trying to find one.
Okay, that's fascinating. So what would you do if you got that call, and how do you help them find the body? Are you piecing together clues there on the scene or interviewing witnesses? What are you doing?
Most of the interviews have already been done, so I get my information directly from law enforcement, where they will tell me, hey, we have this case. Sometimes it's a recent case, sometimes it's a cold case. And I will come in and they'll kind of walk me around the general area where they think that a body might be buried. That's either from their own investigative efforts, perhaps an informant has pointed them in that direction. So I'll start out looking at the taphonomic clues. One of the things that I always tell my students, and participants in CrimeCamp will hear me say this a lot too, is you have to know what's normal in order to be able to identify and interpret the abnormal. And I'm looking for abnormal. I'm looking for, where is this body buried? So I spend some time on every scene just getting a sense of what it should look like in a normal, undisturbed environment. Then I will take a tool that I use, it's ground penetrating radar, and that gives me a sense of disturbances under the soil surface. And those disturbances can be anything because it's based on differences in density from one object to its surrounding environment. So if you have a buried block of concrete, that's going to show me an anomaly in a very similar way to a buried body. So it's something buried. There is a disturbance, but that helps me initially narrow down the areas where the ground has been disturbed. It's not here naturally. Then I'll go in, I'll do some probing, I'll do some coring, and that's letting me look at, again, those disturbances in the natural stratigraphy of the environment, of the soil, to tell me, has this been disturbed by a human? Is this human intervention? That gives me a sense of, is there potentially a body here? As off-putting as it might sound, sometimes you can smell the soil. When you take that soil core and you put it 3 feet down into the ground, and you pull it back up and you say, yes, this soil has been disturbed. If there is a body decomposing in it, oftentimes you can smell that in the soil from the core itself. So if I have reasonable confidence based on information from my investigators, information from the law enforcement partners that we're working with, and then I substantiate that with the ground penetrating radar, with the probing, with the coring, with any taphonomic change to the environment itself, differences in the plant growth or regrowth or lack thereof, I'll typically dig a test pit. A test pit is something I'll put sort of in the center of the area where I think it might be. And if I then encounter human remains, I will stop and I will expand out my area, set up a grid, and then do a very systematic excavation to recover as much of the remains as possible and as intact as possible.
That's fascinating. And a few years ago when a child, J.J. Vallow, was found buried on a property here in eastern Idaho, the experts that testified, it sounds very similar to what you're saying, Dr. Sutton. They went to the backyard and they were able to see whereas a casual observer like me might just see vegetation, they were able to see that there was a particular spot where the vegetation looked like it had been disturbed and it had been cut, and the ground was elevated just a little bit. And then the probe tool that you mentioned, they were able to use, and they eventually uncovered it, and that's where they found poor little JJ's body. So you're probably, in your frame, when you're getting out there, you're looking for anything then that might look unusual, smell unusual, appear unusual.
Absolutely. That's the phrase I use over and over. You have to know normal to identify abnormal. So I always tell my students, the investigators that I'm training, don't jump right into where you think the scene is. Spend some time acclimating to what should it look like undisturbed. And then when you start to look for a disturbance, you're better able to identify it. You're better able to say, this doesn't look right. This is out of place. This is different. And different doesn't mean the same thing in every scene. So you have to treat each scene really individually.
Has there been a case in your career that really sticks out to you that you personally have worked on?
I have, and it was relatively recent. It was a cold case that I was involved in, and this case was particularly relevant to me because I was living in an area very nearby, about 15 minutes away from where this individual went missing at the time. She went missing in 2004 when she was 16 years old, and the case went cold pretty quickly. Investigators didn't give up. They got information from people that were involved in the case at the time, and they had suspicion that her remains were underneath a mobile home. Problematic, right? Because it's underneath a house. And it took several years to get enough information and cooperation of the current homeowners to get them to agree to temporarily relocate that mobile home so that we could come in and search underneath it. Now that's a challenge because when you have a house, there's electrical wiring, there's plumbing, there's cable, there's a lot around it that really complicates ground penetrating radar. You're seeing a lot of noise. So we brought a lot of different people together, including the cable company and the utility company, to tell us where the lines are supposed to be. That's the normal. And I went in with my ground penetrating radar and did a search. We found an area of interest and we excavated. And we were able to locate her remains in that area. We were able to recover her in her entirety. We were able to return her remains to her family. And this is 20 years after she went missing. We were finally able to get some closure for her family and some justice for her.
Wow, so that was just last year.
It was last spring we were able to finally bring that case to a close.
Oh my gosh. So was it something where the person had buried the body and then poured a cement pad and put a home on top of it after the fact?
There wasn't a cement pad at that time. So they were living there to begin with, and the location of the home initially where the burial was would have been kind of in a shielded backyard area, which is how she ended up in that initial space. And when that lot was sold, the initial mobile home that was on it at the time of her disappearance, now confirmed murder, was hauled off and a new one was put in place along with a new driveway and everything else. So it was certainly a tour de force of a lot of interagency cooperation and also just not giving up when the circumstances are difficult, to say, we have credible information and we want to close this case. We want to find her. We want to give her family that closure and that justice.
And was there an arrest in the case?
Unfortunately, the individual had passed away of unrelated causes just shortly before, but he was already incarcerated. So
he had been arrested.
For other crimes, yes. The individual that they had suspicion of being the one that did murder her was already in jail for other things.
And what was her name, Dr. Sutton?
Her name was Autumn McClure.
And she was 16 when she vanished.
She was. And 20 years later, we were able to close that case for her and her family.
Wow. I'm sure that in so many ways, when you're doing this work, that it can be fulfilling when you get that type of closure. On the other other end of the spectrum, have you ever come to a scene where it's too much for you, like too gruesome, or it's too bloody, or is this just your job? You go in and you do it.
This is my job. I go in, I do it, and I love it. I have worked a lot of really bizarre scenes. I've worked hoarding cases. I've worked a mass grave that contained over 60 horse carcasses. I mean, the things I've encountered through the course of my career are quite strange. I'm either a beloved or a feared dinner party guest, and there's no in between.
The stories that you could tell at those parties.
Absolutely. So for me, no, I find that each case is unique, and I find that each case is a learning experience. Even though I've been doing this as my career and I have a formal academic education as well as a lot of practical field experience, I learn something new from every case I work, and I'm grateful for that opportunity.
And I imagine you've probably testified in court cases.
I have.
And do you personally, in your, when you're off work, are you into true crime?
So I'm more of a psychological thriller type person myself. True crime, that's kind of, I guess, to your question, does it hit too close to home? That does for me. I think having a little bit of separation between what I read and watch for fun versus what I do in my day-to-day job, not because it's not interesting. The true crime community is amazing. But I end up thinking, well, hold on, wait a minute. Can I contact that agency? I have this idea. It's
Oh,
just
right. Right. So if you do happen to catch a Dateline or one of those type of shows, you might in the back of your mind be watching it, like analyzing it, like did they do this? Did they do that? Is that kind of what you're saying?
yes,
Oh,
absolutely, all the time. And it's, I say, I don't do a ton of it. It's a little unavoidable. It's just the fixation is there. You can't break it. I love what I do. I find it interesting every day. I tell people, I'm busy, yeah, but I've never had a boring day at work, and not everybody can say that.
well, this crime camp coming up here in end of March should be fascinating. Tell everybody what you will be doing there at the camp.
Sure. So I'm going to really be teaching the participants at Crime Camp a lot of what I just described I do on a crime scene. I'm going to teach them about forensic taphonomy. What does the environment tell you about a potentially buried body? What does it tell you about the process of decomposition? And how do you understand the relationship between the surrounding environment and the process of decomposition? How do you find a buried body? And once you find that buried body, what's the process to properly excavate it to make sure you're maintaining the integrity of the remains, you're not damaging them, and you're collecting them as completely and intact as possible?
Fascinating. Is there anything that you want people to know about your job? Any misconception, or anything that people might have?
I think it's important for people to recognize that it's not necessarily for everyone. The type of work that I do specifically involves human decomposition. And the smells can be challenging. The visuals can be challenging. The tactile sensations can be challenging. And that's okay. I've worked with seasoned law enforcement officers, homicide investigators who are exceptional. They don't like decomp cases, and that's all right. But knowing what you're good at and what your strengths are great. It's just as important to know what you don't like and if it doesn't really suit you and it's not your area of interest or your area of comfort. That's okay. But the biggest thing I always want to try to share with people is you have to let the evidence speak for itself. And that evidence can be anything. Physical evidence will never lie. So when you go out, you work the case, and you let the evidence tell the story, that's all you need to do.
Right. Well, it's not for everyone. It's for probably a select few, I would say. But thank goodness for those select few like yourself who help solve crimes and bring closure to families. And even if it's 20 years later and a young teenager is found underneath a mobile home, those are the type of stories that, they're tragic, but at least there's some sort of finality, hopefully.
Very much. For me, that case really struck me because I saw it on the news when she disappeared. I was living right there, and it was scary because she wasn't that different in age than I am, and seeing the whole story unfold and then watching the case go cold, that sticks with you when it's someone you could have gone to high school with, and being able to be part of that recovery process was significant.
Right. Dr. Sutton, have you been to CrimeCon before?
I have.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts?
Oh, it's amazing. I'm so fortunate I get to go for work that that's great. But oh my gosh, if I didn't get to go for work, I would just go on my own to experience it. It's amazing.
Right. I'm not going to make it to the camp. I'm actually going to be covering a murder trial, but I will be in Colorado. So if you're going to the Denver one in this fall, I'd love to meet you.
Oh,
I'm sure you were at the Orlando one then last year.
I was,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think Orlando was maybe 2 years ago.
2 years
Nashville.
ago. You're right. Nashville was last year. Right. Do
I've
you?
got a Nashville Crime Con poster hanging in my office wall.
Oh, nice. Well, have you presented there?
I have.
Oh, great. Good.
I I gave a presentation. I actually was part of the symposium with John Douglas, the mind
Oh,
hunter. I gave a
right.
presentation on the biological profile. So he's looking at the behavioral profile. I'm looking at the biological profile and using skeleton keys to unlock the mysteries of the biological profile.
Oh, wow. That's so fascinating. I mean, you would think with the, interest in true crime, there'd be, have you been approached like doing a television show or documentary or kind of more on the forensic path?
I have actually a couple times, and I've kind of always turned them down, just given where I was in my career, trying to build the academic program that I'm very fortunate now to run.
Right.
Hasn't fit my career yet, but I think there's so much interest in it, and what I do specifically being very nuanced, very unusual. I think there's a market for it, but I get asked to do podcasts a lot and
Right.
those kinds of interviews, so it's great. I like sharing what I do. I like being able to share something I'm passionate about, and if somebody can learn from me in a way that they go get a job and then they work a cold case or an active case, any case that's able to get justice for a victim and closure for the families, then I've done my job.
Such a smart woman. My thanks to Dr. Sutton. She is one of the many presenters that will be at the Crime Camp in Florida coming up at the end of the month. Now, I want to introduce you to Dr. Gabriele Suboch. Dr. Suboch is a part-time professor in criminal justice and forensic study at different universities. She has a PhD from North Central University. Her dissertation topic was the use of bloodstain pattern analysis. She developed and teaches bloodstain pattern analysis courses online and laboratory courses on campus at the University of Florida. She's taught criminal justice forensic courses in Colorado. She's been teaching criminal justice and forensic courses multiple universities. She's got 30 years of law enforcement agencies. She has spent most of her law enforcement career in crime scene investigation and studying bloodstain pattern reconstructions at scenes. She holds an International Association of Identification certificate as a certified bloodstain pattern analyst, and she's done this for over 10 years. She's had over 1,300 hours of crime scene and law enforcement training. She has seen it all. If it's bloody, she knows it. She can solve the crime. Please enjoy my conversation here. I had a great time chatting with Dr. Gabriele Suboch. Why don't we just start off by telling, if you could tell me, when did you first become interested in forensics and
I
blood spatter and
Yeah, I originally was born and raised in Germany, and I used to work for the Bavarian State Police in Aschaffenburg, which is a small town by Frankfurt. Then in 1988, I met my husband, who was in the army. We got married, and in 1992, we were transferred to the United States. So we moved to Cape Coral, Florida, and I applied for the Lee County Sheriff's Office. I was grabbing the first job I could get, so I was working in intake in the jail. And then they had a opening in intelligence, and that really interested me. So I worked in intelligence advice, doing all the background checks on the suspect and, auto track and computer work. And then next door to me was the crime scene lab. And I always saw them coming in with those bags and they were doing this secret stuff in there. So I was like asking them, what are you doing? And they showed me, how you do fingerprints. They showed me how evidence was packaged. And that's when I found my love in forensics. So when they had the next opening, I applied. And that was in 1995. And I have now over 25 years in forensics.
oh wow, that's amazing. And what is your specialty? What is your main area of focus?
Our lieutenant in the unit wanted to have one of each. We were 6 people covering the whole county for 7 days a week, 24 hours. So we were either on call or we were working, it was always revolving schedule. So he wanted to have one person specialized in firearms, one in arson investigation, so that we always had a specialist in the background, which we needed for a special crime scene. And that's when I decided bloodstain pattern analysis.
When you say blood stain pattern analysis, what is it on base level? What exactly is that?
It's the interpretation of the size, the shape, and the distribution pattern of bloodstains at a crime scene. It allows you to reconstruct how the patterns were created. For example, looking at the elongation of a blood stain, you can determine the direction of travel of the suspect or of the victim. You cut your finger in the kitchen and you stand there, blood dripping down. It's just falling down to the floor and it's based on gravity. So there's no other impact involved. So, and that's what we call a trip pattern. When you walk to the bathroom to find that bandage, you're walking faster and you will see that the bloodstains are not falling at a 90 degrees anymore because they're falling now at a different angle. And that angle gives an elongation of the bloodstains. Now, if we look at the elongation of that bloodstain, where the round part it's what we call the front of the stain, and this is where the blood source is coming from. And if you look at the tail is the direction of travel. So if you look at this, you can say, okay, he's walking from right to left or from left to right.
So a lot of stuff like that is just a casual observer. If I were to walk into a room where a crime had occurred and there was blood everywhere, I personally won't know that. But what's the first thing you're looking for?
The first thing we look for is after we document it, with notes and with photographs, we take overall photographs. And then we have some yellow sticky tape, which we put around the whole bloodstain patterns to get a scale to show the size later on in court and for our analysis. The next step would be the pattern identification. So we're going to look, is it an impact pattern? Is it a projected pattern? Is it a transfer pattern? For example, a shoe pattern, somebody walking with bloody soles through the crime scene. Do we have a wipe or swipe pattern? A wipe is if somebody wipes for an existing stain, and a swipe is a bloody hand along the wall. Then we're also going to look at the surface where the blood is deposited on. Because if you have a smooth surface like a tiled floor, you're going to have no distortion or very, very minimal distortion of the blood stains. But if you take a piece of raw wood and you drop that same blood stain on a piece of raw wood, it is totally distorted. It does not look like a 90-degree plain blood drop. So we need to put all this into perspective and then decide, okay, this could be an impact pattern. This is a projected pattern. This is a cast-off pattern. So what I'm saying is an impact pattern is, for example, a gunshot. If somebody is being, let's say, shot in the head, the projectile is going to go, let's say, to the front of the head, and then it opens up the skin. It makes blood to spatter. So blood will be spattering back to the shooter, actually, into the firearm. That's why we call it back spatter, or it's also called blowback. And then the direction that, let's say the projectile travels through the head and exits in the back of the head, it will create a forward spatter. And that forward spatter is very distinctive.
Over your career, how many dead bodies have you seen?
Too many.
Too many. Right.
Yeah, I participated or was the lead in at least 80 to 100 homicide cases.
Wow. Are there any that stick out to you? Any that, you'll always remember because of the person or the situation?
And there are some cases which you just don't forget, especially if it involves children. I remember I had one time a case where the father was shooting the 12-month-old baby in the kitchen, shot the mother in the bedroom, went upstairs, shot his 7-year-old daughter, and then shot himself. A case like this is very, very hard because that's when the emotions are running high when it involves babies and children. The same for drowning, if we're in Florida. So, we unfortunately have parents who don't pay attention to their children when they fall in the pool.
Yeah, those have got to be so hard.
Yeah, so those cases, and you have to be prepared to work everything. And it's also, if you think you've seen it all, you have not. We work from dismemberment to bodies being burned to plane crashes. We pretty much, in Lee County, we worked everything. We would not call any other agency, and we were it. So whatever case came in, we did it, from bomb threats to burglaries.
Wow. Has there been any scene you've got to where even you yourself have been like, this is too much. I can't handle this. It's too gruesome. I'm sick.
No, I never got sick, and I never thought about it because when you go into a crime scene, you do not have actual time to think, oh my God, this poor woman is dead or this poor guy is dead. What you do is you see it with your professional eyes. You go in there, you look, okay, what do I have here? I have the point of entry is the door is broken in. Then I have you look at the scene, you're going to concentrate on the evidence that is there. You're going to concentrate on what evidence you want to collect, and especially in bloodstain pattern, you're going to look what clues you have within the bloodstain pattern that can help the detective to identify the suspect. So there is pretty much no time for emotions.
Right. Yeah, you're there to do your
You're just
job.
on that professional job mode.
Right. And sometimes you're probably called to testify in court.
Oh, 99% of the time on homicides, I testified. And I testified as an expert witness in numerous cases.
Right. What is it about your job that you like, Dr. Suboch?
I like to put pieces of the puzzle together. And I also like to be able to help the victim and the family of the victims to find closure in bringing the offender to justice.
What do
It's
you think?
rewarding.
I bet, especially if you're able to, find that hidden puzzle piece to solve it or at least take a big step to solving it.
And tell you an example. I worked a double murder case of two elderly ladies in North Myers. She was living with her sister, and some guy broke into their house and plunged both of them to death. And then he tried to cover it up and tried to set the house on fire. However, he was not very good. He left the windows closed, so the fire could not get any oxygen and did not ignite as he wanted. And while he was there in the house, he helped himself with eating some cheese in the refrigerator. And he also drank a bottle of champagne. When we got there, the fire department, cleared it out first. And he stole the victim's car. Then, we did our investigation and we fingerprinted. And there was this champagne bottle underneath the bed. So we collected it, I fingerprinted it, and I lifted good fingerprints of it. We ran it through AFIS and we found our suspect based on that bottle. And we had asked the relatives, I said, is it possible that the victim was drinking that champagne with her sister? And they said, no. She got that bottle when she first got married and her husband died, and she will never open that bottle. So that bottle actually led us to the suspect. Now, the suspect was fleeing to the East Coast because we had a bowler out for him. So we found the car on the East Coast. We went over there and I fingerprinted the car in Palm Beach. And then we arrested him at the bus stop. So
And how did he know the ladies? Or did he?
he didn't. It was just a burglary. He just wanted to see what they have in the house and randomly picked.
Randomly picked, killed them, and as they were dying, he had the cheese and the champagne.
Mm-hmm.
And then he tried to torch the house, but forgot to open a window.
Yeah, he wasn't successful. The way he said, you could see the accelerant, but the way he did it, it would have not burned down the whole house. It just burned one room. That was it. And then he went out.
Had he not had that champagne, do you think you would have been able to catch him?
It would have been much harder because, we had sod in the house, even it wasn't burned, it was black, with dust and, the black smoke and sod all over the place. So, but that was the leading fingerprint that led to him.
Wow. And he's in prison?
Yep.
Wow.
He never even bothered to go to trial. He pled out guilty right away.
He didn't go to trial?
Nope. He pled out guilty.
Do you know, was he connected to other crimes?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that, like I said, that's got to be great having that fingerprint, that puzzle piece to then track down the guy who did it. And just such a sad story too that he did it so randomly.
Yeah, I know. And this is why I like my job, because this is just what gives you the satisfaction for all the hard work. And crime scene work is not easy. If you get called out at 4 o'clock in the morning and it's a homicide, you're probably not going to go home till about 8 o'clock that night. Get a couple hours of sleep and be back.
Right.
It's a very time consuming, and during the time I retired in 2010 from the sheriff's office for my full-time job. And then I volunteered for another 10 years with Henry County because they only had one crime scene girl, and they were friends of mine. So they asked me if I was an auxiliary deputy, if I would be helping them, with taking on call and train the detectives in crime scene investigations, evidence collection. I said, okay. So I volunteered and I did that for another 10 years. But it it is long hours. I don't remember how many birthdays and how many parties and invitations I missed because I was called out to a scene.
Hmm. Well, we appreciate the work you and others like you do because that again helps solve these things. What will you be doing at Crime Camp here in a few weeks?
Yes, I think we're doing one in Gainesville.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you
yeah,
been
I'll do one.
have you been to CrimeCon before?
Yes, I was in CrimeCon in Orlando. I gave a 1 hour presentation in bloodstain pattern analysis, and I was part of the UF team when we were setting up the mock crime scene where the people were walking through, taking pictures, collect evidence, and then had to come to the lab, to the mock lab, and ask for what kind of evidence, what kind of testing they want to have done. And then if they asked for the right thing, we would give them the right answer. And then they would have to figure out who done it. And then they were going into a room where two real judges were present and they had to present their findings.
Right. I walked through that. I didn't do the whole scenario, but I remember seeing it. So, what will you be doing at Crime Camp there in a couple of weeks at the end of March?
What I saw on the schedule, and we haven't even, Dr. Jason Burry, Dr. Sutton, and we have not even talked about it, but what I saw is a 2 hour presentation with pictures, PowerPoints, where I'm going to show them what bloodstain pattern is, what the different patterns look like, what are you looking for, and then the differences between them. There is so much. I teach actually in February a 40-hour blood course with hands-on, and the 40 hours are not even enough to go through everything.
Wow.
And so we are actually in that 40-hour lab course. We're setting up a cage and we take a sponge and fill it with fake blood and then take a baseball bat and create our own pattern. And then once it dried, we take it in the classroom and the students have to reconstruct it for the 3D dimensions on how far the person, well, our sponge, was from the wall and measure it and determine it through a mathematical calculation and through a stringing method as well.
Oh my
Like you see
gosh.
in Dexter, when Dexter does this on the wall,
Right.
that is actually the basic of stringing method. And fortunately, we don't have this technology yet, that we have that glass wall and can do all that. We're using string and a protractor and do it manually.
Wow. That's fascinating. I would imagine technology over the course of your career has changed so much to help you.
Yes, yes, it is. Because actually, Fred Carter from Canada was the first one who developed a computer program for BPA. And it was a very basic program, but it helped in the calculation and the measuring of the stains, because that is usually where you can have an error rate, if you don't measure the stain correctly. And it's all millimeters. So if you're off with the angles, your area, that's why we don't call it the point of origin, we call it the area. Because if you're going to have a point, it's being like the size of a ping pong ball or a baseball, a victim's head is not that size. So you need to
Mhm.
gotta have a larger area.
Right.
And then after that came a program called Hemostat. That program is still the most used one, and it allows to photograph the stains which you pick with a plumb line, and then it calculates and measures, and then it also gives you 2D and 3D sketches. And then I have seen presentation for the Faro laser, which is doing bloodstain analysis, and they demonstrated it with a Maxim in the bathroom, and the laser just measured it, took all the pictures, the layout of the room, and then created all the measurements and created the point of origin. So that laser program is really, really great. However, very expensive.
Right. Wow. Well, that's fascinating. Is there anything that you want to, or do you think there's any misperceptions that people have about bloodstain patterns? Anything that you want to clear up, or one of the biggest, false truths that people might have based off of television or documentary shows?
Yeah, if let's say it this way, the show Dexter actually is the one, who brought bloodstain pattern analysis in the media. And the first show was actually done in Miami. And Toby Wilson, who is a friend of mine, was the director of the DNA lab and also the instructor for bloodstain pattern analysis. And he's the one who was creating all the patterns and was guiding them through the first couple series. So a lot of the patterns are realistic patterns which they showed. Some of the technology they're using is not all there yet. We're not that far yet. We have the first, which I have seen with technology, is you're in Europe a couple of years ago, somebody did a virtual reality on a crime scene using blood spatter area of origin. But this is so difficult and requires so much of technical knowledge. You pretty much have to be almost a programmer to do that. And we're still basing it on our methods, on our stringing methods and our interpretation, because we have to bring this into the courtroom and we have to tell the jurors what we're doing. And if we were throwing big terms around, you lose the jurors.
Right.
The jurors, if you're going to be, oh yeah, it's the area of convergence, and this is the inverse sine of the length and width to determine the angle of impact. There's a lot of jurors who are going to be like, okay, whatever she says, you just lose the jurors. So when you testify, you have to bring it actually down to layman's terms. In other words, if I explain a swipe pattern, I say, remember your kid has chocolate on the hand and it's running on the hallway and putting the chocolate on the wall. This is what a swipe pattern is, except it is the suspect who has blood on his hands and is running out of the room. So bring it down to what everybody can understand.
Well, what a fascinating career, Dr. Suboch. I'm sure that we could talk to you for hours, but for those watching, they can hear you teach at CrimeCamp here in the end of March in Florida on location. They're taking the participants to the university and actually out to different wilderness, I guess.
An outdoor area, and I believe that the Marriott Hotel in Gainesville, and then from there is a bus every morning taking everybody out to the actually training field.
Wow.
So I will be doing on Tuesday from 9 till 11. The theoretical part first, we're going to explain what happens and why it happens. And I'm not going to go totally into physics and math, but I'm just going to provide a great overview on what it is based on. And then in the practical part, we're actually going to use fake blood. And we're going to drip blood on all different types of surfaces. We're going to look at the angles, and we can also do determination of the angles. 10 degrees is more elongated and 90 degrees is round, so we can see that, so we can determine what is in our pattern. And then I'm already planning to create some bloodstain patterns where we can actually do the two-dimensional area of convergence and then the three-dimensional area of origin with the stringing method.
Awesome.
That's the plan so far.
That'll be amazing. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure.
Just such a wise woman. Dr. Suboch will be among the presenters at the CrimeCamp that I told you about, along with Dr. Sutton, Dr. Jason Bird, Sharon Plotkin, CrimeCon. You can learn more about it, and there are still some seats available. I checked with them. There are still some seats available if you go to crimecon.com/crimecamp. You can sign up there. Unfortunately, I will not be there. Otherwise, I would. I'm going to be covering the trial for Lori Vallow in Arizona. But you can go to this crime camp and have a good time and learn from these amazing women. There's so many amazing things out there to learn that I think that it's great to talk with these people that know so much. All right, I think that's it. Thank you for joining me here on Courtroom Insider. It's so good to be back in this new year. If you haven't, feel free to please subscribe, follow. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. My family channel is Meetin' the Eatons. If you want to follow along for fun little videos there. My son has decided to do a weekly cooking segment. It's National Popcorn Day on Sunday, so we're making up caramel popcorn. We'll be posting that video soon. And yeah, you can keep up to date on all the news, everything crime that we're covering. And if you have any questions, happy to answer those as far as these cases are concerned. And we'll be back next week, Thursday night. Don't miss it. Courtroom Insider, another exciting case, other things exciting to talk about. For now, I'm Nate Eaton. Have a good night.